Okay, it looks like our attendees are still slowly filtering in here, but I'm going to get us started. It's just after 5:30. Thank you all again so much for being here tonight. My name is Jill Wirt, and I'll be your MC for the evening. I'm a project manager with Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. Tonight, we are joined by doctoral candidate Megan McElligott, providing an assessment of spinner dolphin acoustic activity in Maui Nui post-COVID-19 boating and travel restrictions. To hear more about talks like these, sign up for our free monthly e-newsletter, Reef and Brief, at mauireefs.org. Maui Nui Marine Resource Council is celebrating 15 years of working for clean ocean water, healthy coral reefs, and abundant native fish. Our work wouldn't be possible without the support of viewers like you. Tonight's presentation is part of Maui Nui Marine Resource Council's monthly Know Your Ocean Speaker Series, usually held on the first Wednesday of each month at 5:30 p.m. via Zoom. This monthly series is supported by the County of Maui. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few announcements from Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. On Monday, July 17th, Hui o Kawaiola celebrated its 100th sampling session in South Maui. A ceremony was held at the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary in Kihei. And the 100th sample was taken by two of our longest standing volunteers, Scott Graves and Harry Hecht, alongside South Maui team member Miley Sharp. Thank you so much to Representative Therese Amato, Senator Angus McKelvey, Councilmember Tom Cook, and Mayor Bisson's Executive Assistant Sharon Banog for attending and supporting the efforts of the Hui. A new reef-friendly landscaping test plot will be implemented at Kealia Pond National Wildlife Refuge. Supported by the Flora Family Foundation, this test plot will utilize a locally made biological soil amendment to restore native plants. You can visit mauireefs.org to learn more about our reef-friendly landscaping program. Thank you to all of our individual members, corporate sponsors, and grant awards for helping us accomplish a remarkable amount of conservation work in 2022. You can download our 2022 annual report at mauireefs.org to visit our major milestones, program highlights, and what we have our sights set on for the future. New signs at the Southeast Baggage Claim entrance were made possible thanks to the support of Hawaii Tourism Authority and Maui Visitors and Convention Bureau. To increase ad space and frequency of play during Maui's busiest summer months to reach more visitors. This digital takeover of baggage claim ensures that visitors are sure to see these messages as they leave the terminal and pick up their bags. The ads feature reef-friendly messaging, including sand only on sand, coral is alive, keep your fins up, coral's alive, and keep your paddle up, mineral only sunscreen, wear a rash guard or use less sunscreen, protecting coral reefs. Welcome to Maui. Enjoy wildlife from a distance. Along with initial exposure at the airport upon arrival, the ads are also heavily promoted on our Facebook and Instagram pages. Maui Nui Marine Resource Council is conducting research to develop a reef-friendly landscaping curriculum, course, and accreditation program for commercial properties. We're seeking input and feedback about current landscaping practices in Maui County. How accessible is it to implement landscaping practices without the use of synthetic landscaping inputs like fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides? Do people request these kinds of practices at commercial properties? If you or someone you know, like a property manager or a landscaping committee member, wants to take the survey, you can scan the QR code below to access and share the form, or send us an email, info@mauireefs.org. A few notes before we introduce our speaker. We will leave time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions, and we invite you to submit your questions by using the Q&A button on the lower edge of your Zoom screen. This presentation is being recorded and streamed to Facebook Live and will be available on our YouTube and Facebook profiles. If you are viewing live from Facebook, you can submit your questions as a comment, and they will be relayed to me. And now for our speaker. Megan McElligott is a fifth-year doctoral candidate at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in the Marine Biology Graduate Program. Her work focuses on using passive acoustics, or underwater sound recordings, to monitor when and where Hawaiian spinner dolphins get their daily rest. The goal of her research is to help wildlife managers determine the best ways to protect spinner dolphins from human disturbance. Thank you so much for being here, Megan. I am so looking forward to hearing all about the study. I will let you take it from here.
Thank you. I will get my slides up. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me as I talk about the work that I've done over the past year, recording spinner dolphins and seeing how they have been using the Maui Nui area as we come out of these pandemic restrictions. So I will begin with a little background about spinner dolphins. They have a daily behavioral cycle that is very predictable and regular. They start out at night foraging on the mesopelagic boundary layer, and this is made up of fish and squid and shrimp, and this mesopelagic layer has a diel migration where it moves up into shallower waters during the nighttime so that it can get food and nutrients in those shallower waters, but be protected from predators by the darkness. Unfortunately for these organisms, spinner dolphins can use echolocation, and so they take advantage of this time period to hunt on this mesopelagic boundary layer and nocturnally forage when it's easier to dive to these shallower depths. So once they have filled their bellies in the early morning hours, they will start to transition to their daytime resting activity. And this transition is marked with increased aerial activity, more acoustic activity as well, so more whistling and clicking, as well as zigzag swimming, which is simply where the animals are changing the direction of their travel between their foraging grounds and their resting areas. So by the morning time, they start to settle into their resting behavior. And this occurs in protected bays that are shallow and have clear visibility and sandy bottoms. And the dolphins will group into smaller sized groups and synchronize their diving in these tighter spaced groups as well. And as they're resting, they'll also have a decrease in their acoustic activity. So they'll become quieter, and they will also display fewer of those aerial flips that we know them so well for. So most of their rest occurs between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And then by the afternoon, they start to transition to head back to their foraging grounds. So again, this will be marked with an increase in aerial activity as well as acoustic activity. They're starting to get more active as they come out of this rest, and they get into larger aggregations and then head offshore to forage on that boundary layer as it comes up in the water column. And we know that Honolua, Mānele, and Hulopoʻe Bay are all used as resting bays in Maui Nui by spinner dolphins. And these are part of the Mānele, Hulopoʻe, and Honolua Mokulea marine life conservation districts. Now, because spinner dolphins have these predictable cycles where they are coming to these nearshore areas during the day, they can also have a lot of overlap with human activities. And this close proximity can be an issue. We've seen in studies off of the Big Island that the presence of human swimmers and tour boats may reduce the amount of rest that spinner dolphins are able to receive, or it will displace them from these prime resting locations. They've also seen similar results in spinner dolphins in the Red Sea in Egypt. And in those studies, they found that spinner dolphins were able to experience the most rest in areas that were closed off to vessels and human swimmers. And finally, there's been research off of Makua Beach, Oahu, where they found that with the presence of vessels and human swimmers, there was a decrease or a delay in rest for spinner dolphins. So because we are concerned about the impacts that this reduction in rest might have, there have been regulations passed to protect spinner dolphins. So NMFS and NOAA passed the 50-yard swim width and approach limit in 2021, and this offered a spatial buffer between humans and dolphins. And there's also the consideration of time area closures, which would block off a part of important resting habitat during the times that dolphins need it for their daytime rest. And as we implement regulations like this, it's important to continue to monitor the dolphins and see if they are changing in positive ways as a result of these regulations. And so we want to understand the interaction between spinner dolphin behavior and human activities. And are there changes in how spinner dolphins use a habitat with less human disturbance? Are they spending more time in resting areas that have less disturbance? We also had an interesting opportunity come out of the pandemic where, because of travel restrictions and boating restrictions, we had this time period where there was a reduction in human activity. There were fewer boats and fewer tourists. So the Division of Boating and Ocean Recreation banned commercial boating activities on March 18th of 2020. And then there were some fluctuations in the amount of passengers that were allowed per vessel at any given time. But ultimately, 50% vessel capacity was allowed in February of 2021, and then by June of 2021, there were no longer any limits on carrying capacity. So that commercial boating activity could return to normal. With that time period in mind, we wanted to see if spinner dolphins changed their behavior, potentially as a result of that reduction in human activity. So our main objectives were to understand the human impacts to spinner dolphins in Mānele, Hulopoʻe, and Honolua, Mokulea marine life conservation districts. And to do this, we determined the daytime, so 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., presence and activity of spinner dolphins in these MLCDs for 1 year, and compare that to past data that was collected in 2016 and 2019 as part of my master's degree and my current dissertation work. And for this data collection, we used passive acoustic monitoring, or PAM. And PAM is possible because dolphins are chatty. They produce echolocation click trains for navigation. They produce first pulse click trains, which are like echolocation click trains, but the time between clicks is so short that it sounds more like a buzz or someone blowing a raspberry. And they also produce whistles to communicate with each other. And so this can be a proxy for dolphin presence. Essentially, if you hear dolphin sounds, it means that a dolphin was present in that area at that time of day to make that noise. And we've seen in typical resting bays that there are 2 peaks in dolphin acoustic activity, one in the morning when they are coming in from their foraging grounds, and then a second one in the afternoon when they are coming out of that resting behavior and starting to become more active and heading out of the bay. And PAM is great because it works regardless of weather conditions or the time of day. So if you're out trying to do a visual survey and the weather's not great, you're not going to have such a great time and you're probably not going to see very many dolphins. But regardless of what's happening at the surface, your recorder is most likely still recording. For this project, we used ecological acoustic recorders, which shortens to EARS, and these are bottom moored acoustic recorders. So we can strap them down to a concrete block that acts as an anchor and leave them to record for months at a time. These consist of a hydrophone, which is just an underwater microphone, and we programmed these to record for 30 seconds every 5 minutes. And it saves those recordings to a hard drive that is protected by the tube that you see on the outside there. With the help of the Division of Aquatic Resources and the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, we deployed ears in our 3 bays of interest, so Honolua, Mānele, and Hulopoʻe. And these were put in 60 to 80 feet of water and left out for 4 months at a time. So every 4 months, the crew would go out and replace the batteries, download the data, and put in a new memory card. And this was done so that we gathered a year of data in each site total. So the Honolua deployment started in January of 2021 and continued through December of 2021. But that first deployment from January to April could not be used in our data analysis because the instrument was buried by sand during some intense swell. So it was still recording, but the sound was muffled by sand. And so we couldn't include it in our assessment. But the Mānele and Hulopoʻe ears were able to record from March of 2021 to March of 2022. So once I get all of the hard drives and I have all of these recordings, year-long worth of recordings in different sites, I can't possibly listen to all of them. It would take far too long. And instead, we look at spectrograms of the recordings. So this is what we're looking at right now, a spectrogram. We have the frequency on the vertical axis. And so really high-pitched sounds are going to be towards the top of this window. And then lower pitch, deeper sounds are going to be on the bottom of the window. And then on our horizontal axis, we have the time. And so that is the start of the recording to the end of the recording from left to right. And finally, the colors you see are representing the energy in the sound, which is essentially how loud the sound is. So if you look at that bright red squiggle at the beginning of our recording on the left-hand side, that is the loudest whistle that we see. And so with practice, I can look at this and recognize that these thin vertical lines that you see coming down from the top of the recording are clicks, those echolocation clicks. These sort of thicker vertical lines are burst pulses. And all of these squiggles are whistles. So I can look at this and know that in this recording, in the time that it was recorded, on the date it was recorded, we had dolphins present in this location. In this case, this was looking in Hulopoʻe, I believe. And I can also quantify that amount of acoustic activity with an index. So I don't just want to know if there was a dolphin or not. I'd like to know some sort of quantification of how many dolphins. It's not a perfect one-to-one, but it gives me an idea of how active they were being. If there's more sound, that means they're being more active than if I were to look at a recording that just had one whistle. This is the acoustic activity index that I applied. And I know it's kind of a lot to look at. It's a big wall of table. But the main takeaways are that as you go down the left column, there's more acoustic activity. So we go from no acoustic activity to 1 to 5 whistles to some combinations of clicks, whistles, and burst pulses. And then on the right side, we have the acoustic activity index. And so this is the number that is assigned to each recording based off of how many whistles, clicks, and burst pulses there were. And it ranges from 0 to 7. So for example, this is a recording in Hulopoʻe. And if you notice, there are some very faint, fine vertical lines coming down from the top of the window, sort of in the middle, and then to the right-hand side. And those are echolocation clicks, but I don't see any other sounds. So this would be considered to have only clicks in less than half of the recording, and it would get an index value of 1. Whereas this spectrogram is showing a recording that has a lot of whistles, burst pulses, and clicks throughout the entire recording. And so this would be assigned greater than 10 whistles, clicks, and burst pulses, and would get a 7. So more acoustic activity equals a bigger number for acoustic activity index. With all of that, we can get into the results, and we'll start with dolphin detections. This is looking at the percentage of days that had dolphins. So at least one recording on these days had a dolphin acoustic signal, some sort of sound. In Honolua, again, we're only looking at deployments 2 and 3 because deployment 1 was buried. And so we have 180 days of recordings, and 77.22% of those days had dolphin detections. In Hulopoʻe, there were 348 days recorded, and 47.99% of those days had dolphin detections. Whereas in Mānele, we had 333 days recorded, and 66.97% of those days contained dolphin detections. So we can see that the percentage of days with dolphin detections vary significantly with location, and there were the most in Honolua and the least in Hulopoʻe. Jumping into the percent of detections by hour of day. So now we're looking at these charts where we have Honolua on the top, Hulopoʻe in the middle, and Mānele on the bottom. And on the y-axis, that vertical axis, we're looking at the percentage of files that had dolphin detections. And then on our x-axis, we have the hour of day. So when you see the number 6, that represents the hour starting at 6 a.m. and ending at 7 a.m. And then the number 7 refers to 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. all the way until 17 is representing 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. So this is that 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. window. And we also have the files labeled as containing either whistles only, clicks only, or both whistles and clicks. And so the bars you see are divided up by the color for those categories. The highest percentages of files with detections, and when I say files, I'm referring to those recordings. The highest percentages occurred in Honolua from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. And most of those were whistles, that sort of medium blue that you see there, or teal color. The lowest percentage of detections were in Hulopoʻe. And Mānele fell in between, with similar amounts of detections in the morning and afternoon for those deployments. I also looked at the average hour in which the first dolphin detection occurred each day, as well as the average hour that the last dolphin detection occurred each day. And I have that plotted here by location. So the first hour, or the hour of first detection, is in the lavender, the light purple. And you can see that Honolua had, on average, earlier first detections of spinner dolphins, whereas all 3 locations had very similar averages for the hour of their last detection, which was just after 12 noon on average. Getting into the acoustic activity index, so this is that quantification of how many whistles, clicks, and burst pulses occurred in each recording. We'll start by looking at the acoustic activity index plotted by date of the deployment. Excuse me, I'll take a sip of water. So with these charts, again, we're looking at Honolua at the top, Hulopoʻe in the middle, and Mānele at the bottom. And we have now on our y-axis, our vertical axis, is the acoustic activity index. And that, again, ranges from 0 to 7. And these are averaged for the entire days or entire date of each deployment. And the y-axis or horizontal axis is showing the date. So from the start of the first deployment to the end of the last deployment. The blue rectangle that you see in the Honolua chart on the top is representing the deployment that was buried in the sand. So you can see there were detections of dolphins, but they're much lower than what you see in the second half of that deployment. And again, it's buried by the sand, and so we're not picking up all of those sounds that we would if it was just on top of the sand on the bottom. And so that's not included in our averages. And the gray rectangles that you see in all three are representing the period of time between deployments where there weren't any recordings being made. So if we look at this, the acoustic activity index varied throughout the year. Some days had much higher values than others, but there isn't really a clear seasonal trend. And we have seen in past data in certain locations in Maui Nui that the acoustic activity in the winter was a bit lower than in the summer, but that's not super clear or super strong signal in these data. Now we are looking at the acoustic activity index averaged by hour of day. So similar to what we were looking at with the detections, where we have the hour of day from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And now we are looking at the acoustic activity index averaged on our y-axis. So the highest acoustic activity index was in Honolua between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. And that trend is similar to what we saw with detection rate. And again, the lowest was in Hulopoʻe. And Mānele was in between with more acoustic activity index or a greater acoustic activity index in the afternoon hours between 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. And with all of this data, we found that the hour of day and the deployment in which a recording took place were significant predictors of what the acoustic activity would be. So with all of that data complete, I was able to make comparisons to past data that I had previously collected in 2016 and 2019 occurred before all of these COVID restrictions. And I do have data in Hulopoʻe from March to May of 2020, but I am still analyzing it. So I don't have it for you today, but I will be working on it to make that comparison. And that occurred during that commercial boating ban. But in the meantime, I have Honolua data from 2016. So that was from October to November. It was 57 days and it was recorded at 64,000 hertz. And so these are also shorter, much shorter deployments. These are each about 2 months versus our year-long samples for the data that I just talked about. But nevertheless, Hulopoʻe was recorded in 2019 for 62 days, and Mānele was recorded in 2016 from October to November for 60 days. All right, so on the right-hand side, we have the percent detection charts that we looked at earlier. But now on the left-hand side, I have the same type of chart, but with the older data. So we've got 2016 Honolua compared to 2021 Honolua. And keep in mind, the 2016 Honolua data was collected at a higher sampling rate of 64,000 hertz. And the 2021 data was collected at 50,000 hertz. And what that means is that in the 2016 data, we were collecting or recording a wider range of frequencies. So we were able to capture a lot more of that high frequency sound than we did in 2021. And clicks are high frequency sounds. So if we were to include more of that in our samples, it's more likely that I will see clicks in the spectrograms. And so when you're looking at these two charts, their overall percentage of files each hour with detections are not drastically different. But we do see that there are much more files with clicks in them in 2016 than 2021. But I believe that is mostly due to the fact that more of those high frequency sounds were included in 2016. And so to correct for that, I will go and reanalyze the 2016 data, but excluding those higher frequencies that weren't included in 2021 data, and that way we'll be comparing more apples to apples. This is showing still the Honolua data, 2016 versus 2021, but now we're looking at the acoustic activity index. And again, it looks very similar to the previous charts, where 2016 has a slightly higher average acoustic activity index in the morning hours than 2021. But again, keep in mind it had that higher sampling rate. It's also a smaller sample size, right? Because we were looking at 2 months versus a year of data. And you can see a bit more variation in the 2-month data because of that smaller sample size. Now, Hulopoʻe is quite interesting. Our 2019 data and our 2021 and 2022 data were both sampled at the same 50,000 hertz rate. So we can compare these. Hulopoʻe 2019 is still a smaller sample size, but we're seeing a much clearer peak in the morning acoustic detections in 2019 than in 2021 and 2022, and fewer detections overall in our more recent data set. Again, looking at Hulopoʻe, but now with the acoustic activity index, we see that same trend where there's more acoustic activity occurring at 8 a.m., generally between 7 and 9 a.m., with a slight peak at 3 p.m. versus 2021, 2022. We still have a little bit of a peak in the morning and a peak in the afternoon, but it's not a very strong trend. And overall, the acoustic activity is much less than what we saw previously. Lastly, we have our Mānele deployments. So Mānele 2016 on the left and Mānele 2021 to 2022 on the right. And here we also see a decrease in the percentage of files with dolphin detections. And again, with that caveat that the 2016 data is a smaller sample size and recorded or sampled at a higher rate. So again, we're getting more of those high frequency sounds. You can see that a bit in the fact that the 2016 data has more detections of clicks, similar to what we saw in Honolua. And then if we look at the acoustic activity index, again, that same pattern where we appear to have less acoustic activity in 2021 to 2022. But we still see that trend in Mānele of acoustic activity sort of throughout the day, rather than the peak in the morning, dip in the afternoon, and peak in the later afternoon. I also wanted to mention the results of some visual surveys that were conducted by amazing volunteers. This was in Mānele, and we had counts of dolphins, human swimmers, and boats anchored and transiting. And this is great because we get an idea of how many dolphins and swimmers and boats are typically in the area. So the maximum sighting seen was 63 dolphins. Average was 6 dolphins at a time. At one point, there was an observation of 300 people swimming, but on average, there were 32 swimmers. And typically, there were 2 boats anchored with a maximum of 10, and generally 1 boat transiting at the time of observation with a maximum of 3. So our main conclusions: spinner dolphins are using South Lanai differently than they did in previous years. Honolua has the greatest acoustic activity across all 3 sites, and most of that activity is occurring in the morning hours between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. Hulopoʻe shows the least acoustic activity and a decrease in acoustics from the 2019 data. And this is sort of counterintuitive because Hulopoʻe is closed off to vessel traffic. So you might expect that the bay with less vessel disturbance would have more or more indications that it is being used mostly as a resting bay, or more so than the other bays. And Mānele has more acoustic activity than Hulopoʻe, but less than Honolua, and also shows a decline in acoustic activity in 2021 to 2022 versus 2016. So some potential explanations. It could be that spinner dolphins are quieter in Hulopoʻe due to being in more undisturbed rest. Like I mentioned, we usually see a peak in the morning of a spinner dolphin acoustic activity, and then a dip in the afternoon as they enter that rest, and then a secondary peak when they come out of that rest. We didn't really see that clear sort of bimodal pattern in Hulopoʻe, but this could be sort of confirmed with visual surveys of really detailed observations of what exact behaviors are spinner dolphins doing in that bay at that time. It's also possible that the vessel activity that we see in Mānele and Honolua compared to Hulopoʻe is not sufficient enough to drive dolphins out of those bays. Those vessels are not typically targeting spinner dolphins specifically, or not in the same way that we see off of the Waianae coast of Oahu and Kona coast of Big Island, where the boats are going out to see the dolphins and are putting people in the water in close proximity to the dolphins. So it's possible that the disturbance of transiting vessels does not outweigh the benefits of the locations of the actual resting bays. And finally, we need to consider the proximity of the bays to the dolphins' prey and foraging areas, meaning we generally assume that when dolphins are resting off of Southwest Lanai, they're going to head west of Lanai to get to those deeper waters to forage. And when dolphins are spending time in Honolua, they're using the Pailolo Channel to the north to feed at night. And if there are changes in prey density off of Southwest Lanai versus the Pailolo Channel, that could influence the dolphins' distribution and use of various areas in Maui Nui. So what are our next steps? Well, visual surveys with focal follows, meaning that you are keeping a detailed log of the specific behaviors of a spinner dolphin over a period of time. That sort of data could capture specific behavioral responses to human presence and could assess if the dolphins are in rest more frequently in undisturbed areas versus disturbed areas. And I will have that Hulopoʻe March to May 2020 data assessed, along with similar assessments for Waianae and Kona off of Oahu and Hawaii Island, respectively. So with that, I would like to say thank you to all of the partners who made this study possible, providing the data and putting the instruments out, as well as funding. And I have my references. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great job. Thank you so much, Megan. That is an incredible amount of data that you've had to go through. So thank you for condensing it and sharing it in a really tangible and meaningful way. So that was very interesting. We do have time for questions. So I want to let the audience know, there is a Q&A box at the bottom edge of your Zoom screen, and you can type any questions in there and I can relay them to Megan. We also have the ability, if you're watching on Facebook, you can write a comment and that will also be relayed to me as well. We also have Emily Fielding on, who is with the Nature Conservancy, and they're a big part in this collaborative effort to make it happen. So we have her here if she wanted to say anything or answer questions as well. I am very excited to see the 2020 data come out. Hi, Emily. So good to see you. And it is, you did mention that with the quieter area of Hulopoʻe Bay, of it almost being counterintuitive, where you think that maybe they'd be louder, but that is a really kind of interesting point, that they're less disturbed, so they're resting and just quieter in general. It's very, very good. A lot of people, oh, we've got some wonderful presentation. Everyone's saying good job. Emily, did you want to say anything about the study at all since you're here?
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I'd love to thank Megan McElligott for all her work over the last, has it been a year analyzing? If you can imagine it's basically 3 years of data, if you add up the 3 sites, and that's a tremendous amount of analysis. So also want to thank the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, Mark Lammers, who made it possible, had the idea. This whole project came about because the conservation action planning teams at Mānele, Hulopoʻe, and Honolua Mokuleia MLCDs really wanted to understand how wildlife was using the bays, because they were considering how people use the bays, and these are marine life conservation districts. And so the team at Mānele Hulopoʻe made spinner dolphins' use of the bays their top priority in their action plan. And they really wanted to know about how human use was affecting the dolphins. So we used the COVID opportunity to pretty quickly get these ears down. And also want to specifically thank Division of Aquatic Resources and Mark Dikos of the Hawaii Association for Marine Education and Research for, and with Megan and the Humpback Whale Sanctuary, getting those ears up and down. It was a big job. And then when the ear got lost under the sand after the big swells at Honolua, and Mark would not give up, and he pulled in all kinds of fantastic partners on that, to folks with boats to help find, and metal detectors and everything, and found that ear, and it was fantastic. I want to thank Pulama Lanai for helping fund the initial, all of the SD cards and the batteries. The Nature Conservancy and Pulama Lanai funded that. And of course, Oceanwide Science Institute and Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, who made, who employ Megan, and so made it possible for us to work with her. And then, of course, the Maui Nui Marine Resource Council for making this presentation possible. Really appreciate all of you.
Yeah, one more.
And one more thing. So the thing about the conservation action planning process at on Lanai, some of the members were long time generational residents of Lanai. Saul Kaho'ohalahala, Joel Aoki, Mike Lopez, and others. And their lifetime of observations of the 2 bays, the reason they were so concerned was because throughout their lives, they had seen many more dolphins than they're seeing presently, and they were very concerned and really wanted to understand that. So this maybe hasn't answered all of our questions, but it's given a good point in time of data to help us get towards that. So thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That's really great. Yeah, the action plan was a big part in getting that started. And it all started with a community effort to want to understand more. So it's great, just the mobilizing that happened to get it all out there. I was interning with the Nature Conservancy at that time when when the ears were going out, and I remember it. So it's really cool to see all of the data come in and get analyzed. So it's one piece of the puzzle for management action for sure. There are a couple questions in the Q&A, so I'll read those. Do you know if there's ever been data or observations in La Perouse in South Maui?
So I don't know about historical observations. I'm sure there are some available, but I haven't looked at them myself. Actually, in my when I first started my master's, we wanted to include La Perouse, but lost that year. However, I am going to be working on a project where we look at recordings in La Perouse coming up in, I think we're going to start recording in the end of this month. So yes, because that has been a big question. We know that we've seen spinner dolphins there. It's just a matter of including them in our greater studies and having that baseline, or at least point in time, what's their status currently.
Yes, thank you. That'll be great to add to the data set. Someone asked, sometimes they see dolphins attracted to boats and jump in the vicinity of their wake. Is it possible they are attracted to boats?
Yeah, so we definitely can't rule that out. We do see that play behavior. Oftentimes you'll have these the groups of dolphins that are sort of more tightly spaced, like I said, resting. And sometimes you'll have dolphins on the sort of perimeters that might be younger males that sort of check out distractions, essentially. And I've seen this happen in Makua a lot when I did shore surveys there, where a few of the dolphins will go check out the group of people or the boat, and they might do some of their flips and play behaviors, while the majority of the group goes the other direction. And so I don't have, exact data on that, but I do suspect that there might be, different levels of the group being able to rest, or maybe potentially even kind of distracting whatever the disturbance is, or maybe they're younger and so they're more curious at that age. All of these are speculation, of course, but yeah, I mean, that is a behavior that we see. And that was one thing that I was wondering about, if they do like to bow ride on the boats as they come in to Mānele.
Yeah, very interesting.
Can I add one other point to the earlier question? This study wasn't meant to be comprehensive for all the spinner dolphin activity in Maui Nui. There are other hotspots like Keone O'Io or La Perouse Bay, there's a bay on Kaho'olawe and so on. It was really driven by the fact that the Division of Aquatic Resources and their partners and facilitated by ourselves were working on these action plans for the MLCDs. So there is, like Megan mentioned, other research on Maui Nui dolphin activity, but can't tell you exactly where to find that right now.
Right. Are boats supposed to stay out of Honolua Bay during specific hours? Has that been regulated in any way?
Oh, I don't know. Do you know, Emily?
Yeah, there are no such rules.
There are moorings for commercial use, correct?
No, I wouldn't. I don't know if anybody, we'd have to ask a DAR or DOBOR to answer that. There are moorings, but whether they're official day use moorings or not, but also day use moorings are not exclusively for commercial use, they're for any day user. So I don't know the full answer to the question, but there are no restrictions on time of use, time of day.
From the latest data sets, what is the estimated Hawaiian spinner dolphin population for the Maui Nui region?
Yeah, that's a great question that I also have. The population estimates are, the most recent ones for Maui Nui are from 2010. And so they're likely underestimating, and I can't remember off the top of my head what that stock was. I want to say it was around 300, but we can't rely on those numbers anymore. Leah McPherson at the Marine Mammal Research Project at UH Manoa just actually defended her master's thesis this morning, where she was looking at population estimates for the Waianae dolphins. And I know one of her lab mates, Claire Lacey, was doing estimations for the population around Oahu and has also looked at Big Island, but I'm not personally aware of updated counts for Maui Nui, and I'd be really curious to have that information, because I think it would help us know, answer the question of, are we seeing fewer dolphins in South Lanai because they're going elsewhere, or are there actually fewer dolphins in that population? So I'm not sure what their plans are for future data collection, but as I know, their papers will be coming out soon with at least the Big Island and Oahu populations.
Great. Are you able to differentiate the studied sounds from spinners, bottlenose, and spotted?
Yeah, so that is a fairly big assumption that we make with our passive acoustic monitoring. There was previous passive acoustic monitoring done by one of my previous lab mates, where she was looking at all sorts of different odontocete, so toothed whales, including different species of dolphins and the blackfish as well. And she was looking at the different frequencies. So spinner dolphin whistles tend to be higher frequencies. We can't tell spinner dolphins apart from like striped dolphins or other like spotted dolphins. They have very similar frequencies, or at least I can't tell just by looking at the spectrogram. So I am assuming that they're spinners. But since we know that in these bays, in these sort of shallower depths, we have visual confirmation that it is a majority spinner dolphins. Even if we are occasionally getting a bottlenose in there or some spotted dolphins, it would be so few and far in between that it's not going to change the overall trend that we're seeing. So it is an assumption, but it's a fairly safe assumption that we are confident in that a vast majority of our data is spinner dolphins.
Awesome. That was the last question in the Q&A box. So I just wanted to say mahalo to both you and Emily for coming on tonight. Megan, your research and your data analysis is very impressive, and it's just, looking at the spectrograms or spectrographs there. I mean, your eyes, you go cross-eyed after a while, I'm sure. So it takes a lot of time to dedicate to it. So just thank you for your time and all of your effort and for being here to share with us. So I'm going to go ahead and close us out, and just thank you so much again. If anyone else has any other questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A box and we can type answers as we say aloha. But otherwise, if you missed some or all of tonight's presentation, it will be available on our Facebook and YouTube pages. To all of our audience, thank you so much for attending Maui Nui Marine Resource Council's Know Your Ocean Speaker Series, sponsored by the County of Maui. Our next Know Your Ocean Speaker Series event will be held on Wednesday, August 30th, with Kira Hughes and Honolua Ho'opai Silva with the Restores Resilience and Coral Resilience Lab at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. To sign up for this talk and future talks, you can sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, Reef and Brief, at mauireefs.org. If you're looking to get involved in a really wonderful program here on Maui, you can support ocean water quality monitoring by volunteering or donating to our community-based coastal water quality monitoring program, Hui o ka Waiola. I mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation. We just celebrated our 100th sampling event in South Maui. This program is conducted by Maui Nui Marine Resource Council, the Nature Conservancy, and West Maui Ridge to Reefs Initiative in partnership with the State of Hawaii Department of Health Clean Water Branch. Our program leads and volunteers test ocean water quality every 3 weeks at 29 locations in South and West Maui. So if you're a Maui resident looking to get involved, this program always seeks reliable West and South Maui volunteers, and you can visit huiokawaiola.com for more information. I just wanted to say a huge mahalo to anyone who watches these webinars and contributes to Maui Nui Marine Resource Council's programs. Your contributions make a huge difference. You can support Mauka to Makai restoration projects from ungulate fencing and population management, reef-friendly landscaping, coral restoration, to limu sampling for nitrogen isotopes and pesticide testing. A small amount goes a long way for Maui Nui's reefs, so you can donate at mauireefs.org. If you've missed some or all of tonight's presentation, you'll be able to view it again on Facebook Live or on our YouTube channel, Maui Reefs. You can also follow us on social media for updates and news. And last but not least, we want to thank all of our sponsors and supporters who are making our work possible. We also wish to thank individual donors like you. Mahalo for making a difference. Mahalo for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. We will see you at the end of the month. Aloha.